In the past couple weeks, I went down to Orlando, Florida for the IAPA Expo, and that was a lot of fun being able to see what was going on in the industry. And we also just happened to be going to the four Disney parks and Universal because we were down there. And I happened to have a case study due around the same time, so I decided to do it on the Journey of Water featuring Moana at Epcot. The Journey of Water is an attraction that Disney has done in a couple years, that being an interactive walkthrough attraction, and it tells the story of the water cycle and how to conserve water. The first cycle you're greeted with when you walk in is rain, and of course, to stimulate this, they had mist and actual falling water that would splash on you and get you a little wet. And for the interactive experience, they had a musical harp that you could go and you would run your fingers through it, and it would play music. And there were a couple of these, you could actually hear a couple of them mixing together and trying to harmonize. But it was really neat because it's a technology we haven't really seen before. The second cycle is stream, and to demonstrate a stream, they had a mini stream going on with the jumping laminar flow fountains that were lit up as well, and they were really cool because I love seeing these fountains. I think they're really futuristic and really interesting to look at. And for the interactive element, they had a spot that you could stand in. When you wave your arms up and down, and the faster you wave your arms, the more the water would shoot around and shoot up around you. And after this, you go into the wetland, which of course they had a small wetland you could actually look at and see all the different plants and how the water works. And for the interactive, they had a wet side and a dry side, with the wet side you being able to walk over a very, very thin puddle or little moving stream of water, so you could be in the wetland. And it was cool. It kind of just cleaned your shoes, really. And after this, you're greeted with the spring, which is a small pool underneath some rocks and a little canopy. And for the interactive element, they had a spot where you could stand, and when you hold your hand out, the water would come to meet you. And when you moved your hand up and down, the water would move simultaneously to meet your hand, which is really cool. And of course, your hand got a little wet, and of course you just shake it off. And after this, you're greeted with land, and it's interesting. It's more like showcasing a waterfall, and for the interactive element, they had almost like a water curtain that you could walk through, and as you walk through, the water would shut off and you'd not get wet. The only thing is you have to walk very slow, because if you run through, I saw some kids run through it and they got wet. The sensors they're not fast enough, which is a shame, but it's still pretty magical when you walk through. And then after this, you're greeted with a large lake as well as several other waterfalls to go with the land, but the lake is a separate area. And there's a large statue of Te Fiti, which dominates the area. But when you actually look at the lake, you'll see a lot of cool, interesting aspects. I believe there were some lily pads in there, and of course it was lit well. And after the lake, there is river, which is basically like the stream, but larger and more jumping fountains. There wasn't a interactive element for this, or one that I couldn't quite remember if there was one. But it was kind of serene being able to stand there. There are little spots you could go and stand and experience just being in the stream. And after the river, of course, you go into the ocean, which had one main large interactive element, and that being a large wave where if you as a group of several other people all raise your arms at the same time, a giant wave would come splashing through, and it'd vary on size based on how many people were there. And that was really cool, and of course, you get a little wet. And there are also a lot of jumping fountains going along, and these actually got you kind of soaked. I got very wet, and so did my friends when we were going through. And of course, after the ocean, it leads you back to the sky when it evaporates. So for this, they had a geyser element where you could jump onto the spot and a geyser would shoot up at you, and of course you get a little wet. There were a couple of these, and it's really cool because it worked very well. And there was also some mist and a little splash pad around sky, and there were also these little fountains you could stick your fingers in, and I don't know, it's kind of like a shield of water. It's very cool. It was really neat to just play with and get your hands a little wet. And when you come back at night, it is a completely different experience. When we came back to the Journey of Water at night, we walked out of Finding Nemo, and we looked and we just saw all this light happening over there with all these trees lit up, all the water lit up, and it was cool. So of course we had to go visit it, and I'm very glad we did. It was a very different experience, being able to see all the water lit up and all the warm lights for flames and lanterns everywhere, and it's a completely different experience. If you are going to go visit this, I recommend going at night. It's a lot better, or go in the morning when it's still somewhat lit up. But it was really cool because with the laminar flow fountains, it was shining perfectly through them, and the giant wave at the end also was lit up blue, and the lake feature and the spring were also lit up very nicely. It was really cool to see. They did a great job with all the lighting for it. Now, if you look at this through a creative aspect, it's really genius for the way that they educate people, as well as entertaining and let them interact with the elements, because no one likes to be lectured. It's a proven fact. So when Disney announced that they were going to have a educational walkthrough experience, people were a little but they decided to bring in their own IP, that being Moana and the characters from Moana, which they integrated throughout the attraction in the rocks. And it was really fun being able to go back a couple times and seeing, oh, what characters can we find this time? And some of them were very well hidden. There is a Hey Hey Chicken that I never found. I don't know where it is, but I've seen it in pictures on Instagram and YouTube. But when you're walking through this attraction, it brings you through the water cycle. And of course, there were these little plaques showing you what stage you were at in the water cycle, and you can read up about part of the water cycle, which I actually looked through, and they would tie it to some aspects of Moana, which was nice to see. And you really didn't feel like you were being educated, but you were, especially when it's like, oh, how does water get back into the sky? It's by a geyser, or it evaporates, and how water comes down, it's through rain or mist. And it was very genius, because I feel like if they did just a regular walkthrough attraction without Moana, it wouldn't get many people. That's how original Epcot was, and there's a reason why most of those attractions aren't there anymore. But they did a really great job. I wanted to keep coming back in just because of how cool it was, and being able to, of course, as I went multiple times, I was actually seeing, oh, how does this work in the water cycle? And it was cool to read up on it. Now, the big theme they're trying to showcase in this attraction is conservation of water and keeping water pure and how it's supposed to be. And I feel like they did this really well, because on the plaques it shows you how certain pollution could affect certain aspects of the water cycle, such as streams with fertilizers going into them and then going into rivers, then lakes, then rivers again, and then the ocean, and then what that does to the ocean. And it was really neat to see, especially since it's actually a fact that we can't drink rainwater it's not very healthy anymore due to the amount of pollution. And it kind of inspired me. I was like, maybe I should conserve more water, which they achieved their goal, if that's what it got me thinking like. Now, I feel like they did this attraction very well, but there are two major changes that I feel like they could have done to make this attraction even better. Now, the first one is the music. And if you're actually walking through the attraction, the music will build up with no vocals and just instrumentals in the beginning, and then it'll have full band and vocals at the very end and like chanting. And it was really cool, especially since it's actual Moana music they play in the movie. But I feel like it's a little too loud at the beginning. I understand why it's loud at the end. You know, it's a big finale, boom, we gotta show it off. But in the beginning, it's a little more chill, and it was like you had this like drums beating behind you, and I was like a little overwhelmed. And another thing I would change, which is more subjective and more kind of how I think, is the Epcot wall is very visible in this attraction. It's right behind it, and you could see it just about anywhere in the attraction. And this is a good and bad thing, because when you're in the attraction, you want to be immersed, and having a giant geodesic sphere staring down at you, especially when it's lit up, it's very bright, it kind of takes you out of it a little. But on the bright side, it's a really good photo opportunity, showing how you can mix technology and nature, which I don't know if this is intentional, but if it was, well done, I like it. It sends a strong message. But if they wanted to hide it more, I feel like they could have, especially with larger trees, where there are parts where it's a little less visible, but you could still see it prominently, and there are some parts where just you could see the entire thing. Which, like I said, it's subjective, is more how I thought they could do, but it's up to whoever. Overall, I hope Disney will include more interactive walkthrough experiences throughout their parks, because it was a little more relaxing and less stressful, because as fun as the parks can be, they're a little stressful and can sometimes be a little boring when you're waiting in queues. And whenever you have a walkthrough attraction, there is no queue and you're already in the attraction experiencing it. And it was also educational, which I know Disney loves to do at Epcot and some other parks like Animal Kingdom. And I feel like having more walkthroughs attraction could allow them to spread their message more efficiently and effectively. And I hope in the future Disney implements more of these, just like the Journey of Water featuring Moana in Epcot.